You're 17 years old, standing in a photographer's studio in Philadelphia, and someone is telling you that your face could change your life. Until that moment, life has mostly felt like something you survive rather than something you control. Home never felt safe. Stability never lasted long enough to trust. You learned early that people leave, that promises break, and that the world rewards people who fit neatly into expectations you were never meant to satisfy. But the moment the camera turns toward you, something shifts. For the first time, you feel seen instead of judged. Within weeks, you're on a bus to New York City. Within months, your face is appearing in magazines that once seemed impossibly distant, the kind of glossy pages that belonged to another universe. Everything moves with frightening speed. Editorial shoots, casting offices, fashion sets, designers whispering your name, photographers rearranging entire concepts around your presence. It doesn't feel like luck. It feels like being pulled into a storm already in motion. Gia Carangi would later become known as the world's first true supermodel. Long before the age of celebrity modeling exploded with names like Cindy Crawford and Naomi Campbell, Gia changed what beauty and fashion could look like. She arrived during an era dominated by blonde hair, blue eyes, and carefully polished perfection. But Gia was something different. She had dark hair, intense brown eyes, and a rebellious energy that photographers couldn't stop chasing. She looked dangerous and vulnerable at the same time, like someone who belonged both on the cover of a dangerous and vulnerable at the same time, like someone horrible at the same time, like someone who belonged both on the cover of a constant, vulnerable at the cats and vulnerable at the same time, like someone who picked someone, like magazine and nowhere at all. The fashion industry had never seen anyone quite like her. And once they did, they couldn't look away. Gia Marie Carangi was born on January 29, 1960 in Philadelphia. She was the youngest of 3 children growing up inside a household defined by instability and emotional chaos. Violence and tension lived in the walls of her home. Her parents' marriage was turbulent, filled with arguments and pain that left scars no child could properly understand. When her mother eventually left the abandonment marked Gia in ways that followed her for the rest of her life. Those who knew her later often pointed back to those early years, believing the wounds of childhood never really healed. She learned too young that the people who are supposed to stay can disappear without warning. That lesson shaped the way she moved through the world. Trust became difficult. Attachment felt dangerous. Love always seemed temporary. As a teenager, Gia began creating a version of herself that felt stronger than the frightened girl underneath. She idolized David Bowie and admired the way he refused to fit neatly into categories. Inspired by his androgynous style and fearless individuality, Gia cut her short, dyed it unusual colors, and wore vintage men's clothing pulled from thrift stores. She walked through Philadelphia in Levi's jeans, leather boots, oversized shirts, and an attitude that dared anyone to question her. At a time when conformity was expected, especially for young women, Gia made herself impossible to ignore. She was also openly gay during an era when that honesty carried real consequences. In the late 1970s, queer teenagers faced enormous social pressure, particularly in working-class neighborhoods where fitting in often meant survival. But Gia never seemed capable of pretending to be someone else. The same defiance that would later captivate the fashion industry already existed inside her long before she became famous. She moved through the world with a mixture of confidence and pain that made people stare without fully understanding why. That combination became her power. It also became part of what destroyed her. By the time she was discovered, Gia was already orbiting the edges of the modeling world in Philadelphia. Small shoots, local photographers, quiet recognition from people who sensed she had something extraordinary. Eventually, the right eyes landed on her at the right time, and New York stopped feeling like fantasy. It became destiny. Still a teenager, Gia walked into Wilhelmina Models and was signed almost immediately by Wilhelmina Cooper herself. There was no slow introduction to the industry, no gradual adjustment period. Fashion grabbed Gia and accelerated her life overnight. Within months, she was working with the most influential photographers in the world. Major campaigns arrived one after another. Designers wanted her face, editors wanted her energy. Photographers became obsessed with the rawness she brought to film. She wasn't polished in the traditional sense, and that made her magnetic. She looked real in a world built on artificial perfection. One of her biggest champions became legendary fashion photographer Francesco Scavullo, who famously described Gia as having the perfect attitude because she carried herself like someone who simply didn't care what anyone thought. The late 1970s fashion world was built around sameness. Models were expected to embody a soft, elegant ideal that felt distant and untouchable. Gia shattered that image. She brought edge into high fashion. Her expressions carried emotion instead of emptiness. There was rebellion in her eyes. She didn't pose like someone trying to please the camera. She looked like she was challenging it. The success came at unbelievable speed. Gia appeared on the covers of British Vogue and Vogue Paris in rapid succession, an almost unheard of achievement for someone so young. Soon after, she appeared in American Vogue and multiple international editions of Cosmopolitan. Her image became unavoidable. Designers such as Armani, Dior, and Versace wanted her attached to their campaigns. She walked runways for elite brands and became one of the most recognizable faces in fashion before she was even old enough to fully understand. The industry quickly realized Gia represented a new era. Younger models who appeared after her were constantly compared to her. Cindy Crawford was famously nicknamed Baby Gia early in her career because photographers wanted someone who captured the same dangerous charisma Gia had unknowingly become the blueprint for what the world would later call the supermodel. One face dominating magazines, campaigns, and culture all at once. But there was no guidebook for surviving that kind of attention. The industry knew how to create stars. It didn't know how to protect them. By age 20, Gia was living inside the glamorous fantasy fashions sold to the public. She spent nights at Studio 54 surrounded by celebrities, musicians, and socialites beneath flashing lights and disco music. She appeared in the music video for the song Atomic by Blondie. Her famous chain-link fence photo shoot became one of the defining images of late 1970s fashion. Everywhere she went, cameras followed. From the outside, her life appeared perfect. But underneath the fame, old wounds remained untreated. The loneliness she carried from childhood never disappeared simply because she became famous. If anything, success intensified it. The fashion world surrounded her with excess and temptation while offering almost no emotional support. Drugs flowed through parties and clubs like part of the atmosphere itself. As long as models looked beautiful and showed up for work, nobody asked difficult questions. At first, Gia participated casually, the way many young people in nightlife circles did at the time. But the early 1980s brought something darker into New York's social scene. Heroin spread through clubs, fashion circles, and artistic communities with devastating speed. Like many others, Gia initially believed inhaling it was safer than injecting it. People underestimated how quickly dependency could take hold. By the time they understood the danger, addiction had already rooted itself deep inside their lives. Eventually, Gia began injecting heroin. The drug became an escape from emotional pain, insecurity, exhaustion, and pressure. But addiction doesn't stay hidden forever. By 1982, the marks on her arms were visible. Photographers noticed the scars and blisters left behind by repeated injections. The industry's response revealed everything about its priorities. Instead of helping her, they simply hid the evidence. During one of her later cover shoots, stylists positioned her body and draped fabric strategically to conceal the marks on her arms. If the final image looked beautiful, nobody wanted to discuss the reality underneath. But addiction slowly destroys reliability, and reliability is everything in fashion. Gia started arriving late to shoots or appearing unable to work. Sometimes she disappeared entirely. Fellow model Janice Dickinson later recalled seeing Gia fall asleep in makeup chairs before shoots even began. The energy that once made her unforgettable was being consumed by dependency. Fashion is an industry built on schedules, money, and image. Studios cost thousands of dollars. Entire teams revolve around a single shoot. When Gia became unpredictable, people stopped viewing her as a person struggling with addiction and started seeing her as a financial risk. During a major shoot connected to Versace in 1982, things reportedly fell apart completely. After that, whispers turned into decisions. The calls stopped. Designers quietly moved on. There was no public announcement declaring Gia blacklisted. The industry simply erased her through silence. Only Francesco Scavillo continued offering her work consistently. The same man who had championed her from the beginning remained loyal while nearly everyone else disappeared. The magazines that had celebrated her moved on to younger faces. The agencies that profited from her fame distanced themselves. The rebellion that once made Gia exciting now made her inconvenient. Fashion loved dangerous beauty only as long as it remained profitable. Gia repeatedly tried to get clean. She entered rehabilitation.